Hello everyone, and welcome to my next video. Today I'm going to answer the question of why doesn't she just leave? There are so many reasons that women can't or don't leave their abusive relationships. I'm going to be talking from a woman's standpoint because it's generally accepted that women are more commonly abused than men, but that doesn't mean that men aren't victims of domestic violence and abuse. They definitely are, we just don't hear about it as often. So there are a few different categories to go over. The first is fear of multiple things. Abusers put all kinds of pressure on their victims to stay within the relationship. There's usually some fear of retaliation. One statistic found that of the total domestic violence homicides, about 75% of the victims were killed as they attempted to leave the relationship or after the relationship had ended. Therefore, most victims are completely justified when they say that they're afraid that their abuser will track them down and terrorize them. Leaving is the most dangerous time for the victim and for her family as well. He may be threatening to kill himself if she leaves him, or he might hint at endangering the victim, the kids, or the pets. He may be intimidating her by smashing things, displaying weapons, destroying property, or abusing pets if and when she tries to leave the relationship. If she's unregistered, he may threaten to call immigration. If it's a same-sex relationship, the abuser may threaten to out the victim's sexuality. She may fear for any children involved with the abuser. She may be afraid of being separated from these children in a custody battle. Even if she wins custody, the abuser can still use visitation rights to harass the family. Many abusers will take the opportunity to use the children to make the victim feel guilty, especially if they're too young to understand the separation from their father that they still love. She may fear losing societal status, perhaps if her husband has friends in high places, or if gossip about her relationship will damage her reputation in some way. She may just simply fear change. Leaving an abusive relationship usually requires the victim to uproot her whole life and move somewhere else. This can be a terrifying prospect, and she may just feel like she's not up to the challenge. She may fear being alone or of not meeting anybody else. The abuser may even emphasize how lonely she will be if she leaves the relationship. Victims are usually isolated from their friends and family in some way, to the point where the abuser is the only support system that the victim has, so loneliness is a very real concern for the victim. If the victim has a job, she may fear that he will harass her in the workplace. He may have already tried to sabotage her job. Abusers can cause absenteeism in the workplace by injuring the victim to the point where she can't work, or by causing her so much stress that she isn't competent enough to work. She may also fear losing her job once the abuse becomes public. Another type of barrier is economic reality. If the abuser prevented the victim from having a job for a while, the victim might lack occupational skills. She feels like she would be unable to provide for herself or her family in the event of a divorce. Michael Samsel puts it very eloquently when he says that even where the survivor recognizes the abuse and its inevitability, she may stay in the relationship because it appears to be and may in fact be her best option in life, considering the difficulties and lack of support she faces alone. Lack of insurance is another reason she may be staying, especially if she or her family is facing medical issues. And then there's simply that she may not want to face a negative change in her standard of living if she leaves the relationship. Personal problems can cause issues when it comes to leaving abusive relationships. If she's battling depression, she may not feel like she has the strength to leave. Depression can sap you of your energy and make you feel like you're completely alone. She would be in no shape to tackle her relationship issues without help. On the other hand, she may be suffering from substance abuse problems. She might not be able to keep herself out of rehab long enough to get help for the abuse she suffers at home. Sometimes women can develop some degree of Stockholm Syndrome, where she learns to identify with her abuser because it represents her best chance for survival. For example, if the abuser has a mistrust of authority, then the victim will reflect this attitude as well, because appearing to oppose this attitude would bring harm upon the victim. This makes it almost impossible now for the woman to approach authorities for help. Then there's the battered woman syndrome, which is a subtype of PTSD. This is where the victim goes into a sort of fog. She's stuck reliving her past trauma, displaying both avoidance behaviors and hypervigilance, and experiencing disrupted interpersonal relationships. She's basically stuck inside her own head, too scared to do anything or feel anything, and it isolates her from those who might be willing to help her. Both of these syndromes present severe barriers to leaving abusive relationships, and I'm going to talk about them more in depth in a later video. Pressure from others can be a significant setback to getting help. Children can have a major amount of pull. They may still want to spend time with their dad, regardless of the pain that it puts mom through. Mom may still want to provide the kids with a two-parent home, and she may be willing to endure the abuse for it. All victims experience pressure from their abusers to submit. Following an abusive outburst is the honeymoon phase, where the abuser will put on his best behavior and plead and promise that he will get help and that it will never happen again. She may think these apologies and false promises mean the end of the abuse, when in fact it's just one phase in a repeating cycle. One of my abuser's favorite tactics was to argue late into the night until I was too exhausted to fight anymore. He withheld my right to sleep until he got what he wanted, be it attention, sex, whatever. These are just a few of the many methods that abusers can use to coerce their victims. Culture and language barriers can be a problem too. In some cultures, women are expected to submit to their husbands without complaint. They don't put up with protests, and divorce is not permitted, and it may even be considered as bringing shame upon the family. Religion can present a similar problem. The pastor may be misinterpreting the biblical text in such a way as to make the woman feel trapped in the marriage, or he may be distorting scripture to justify the right to batter. A victim's family can also place significant pressure on the victim to stay with her abuser, and this is usually because they just don't understand where the victim is coming from. Bystanders often believe that victims deserve the abuse as punishment for mistakes that they've made. If so, her family is probably asking her, well, what did you do to make him so mad? Victims often have misconceptions about themselves. The victim may blame herself, believing that the abuse will stop if she can just fix her character flaws. He may be controlling her by emphasizing her incompetence and making her think that she would be unable to function on her own. And it's always possible that the victim may have just simply given up. They submit to the abuse because they don't want to fight anymore. Even if this is the case, submission is not equal to consent. Oftentimes, the connection felt to the abuser creates a barrier to leaving. The victim may have a long history with the abuser, and long-established feelings of love and attachment are very difficult to put aside. It can be especially confusing if the abuse was minimal or non-existent even at the beginning of the relationship. I was with my abuser for 6 years. I was very proud of how long the relationship had lasted, and I viewed it as a sort of testament to our love and the strength of our relationship. I always knew that something was off, but I was very reluctant to give up on such a long-standing commitment. Despite everything, I still loved him and believed that the relationship had a chance to work. Another issue is concern for their partner's well-being. She may feel obligated to stay because she fears that he will be arrested or deported or otherwise incapable of caring for himself. Or she may feel obligated to stay to help him face his personal demons, especially if the abuser has depression, substance abuse problems, or has threatened suicide. My abuser's diabetes became my responsibility. It was my job to remind him to check his blood sugar or to take his insulin shot. Another woman in my situation might have felt compelled to stay, just to make sure that he didn't neglect himself. Victims stay in abusive relationships because they hope that the abuse will go away, and they refuse to believe any evidence to the contrary. They block out the bad stuff, and they focus on their partner's good traits, such as loyalty or dependability. Victims are typically very conflicted about their partner's behavior. Abuse is usually interspersed with periods of kindness and affection, again, the honeymoon phase, and eventually followed by an outburst of violence. In these periods of calm during the storm, it's what gives the victim a sense of hope. He is essentially using positive reinforcement to convince her that he has changed. Most victims are coerced with feelings of guilt and shame. Humiliation is another form of control that abusers use. She may be too embarrassed to admit to what is going on in her relationship. The abuser may shift blame from himself onto the victim, using such methods as minimization, rationalization, and trivialization. For more info on these terms, you can refer back to my earlier videos. It's common to hear that the victim blames themselves for the abuse they suffer, and unfortunately, their partner, their family, or their friends might agree with this outlook. This only reinforces those feelings of guilt and shame, and it makes leaving the relationship that much harder to do. The victim's children may be unsupportive of being separated from their father. They may be unintentionally guilting their mother to spend time with the abuser, or by resisting a move to a new school or a new home. Usually there are a few misconceptions about marriage and relationships that the victims experience. She may feel that her relationship problems are private and that seeking help from a third party is inappropriate. She might believe that the abuse is normal. If she grew up in an abusive environment, then she might not know what a healthy relationship looks like. It might be difficult for her to realize that her relationship is not normal. She may believe that marriage is permanent, regardless of what goes on inside it. Her church may have facilitated this view by discouraging divorce and encouraging reconciliation. Her partner may be restricting her to gender roles within the relationship. He may believe that he alone should have the decision-making power. He may believe that women should meet the needs and desires of their husbands and that she should be devoid of these needs and desires herself. He may be telling her that he is the king of the castle and therefore she must submit to his demands. And finally, one of the most significant setbacks is a lack of resources or support. Victims often lack monetary resources, especially if the abuser controls the finances. Having little or no access to cash can be a major setback. If he acts like Mr. Perfect in public, then it's entirely possible that no one will believe her when she eventually tells her family and friends, even if she shows them evidence. This is another version of the whole Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde facade that I talked about in an earlier video. Abusers often present this upright and respectable persona to the public, but then turn around and treat their family like crap behind closed doors. Population minorities may distrust law enforcement or other social services that are designed to help them, especially if they've had bad experiences with them in the past. The victim may lack support in that she is geographically too far away for her family and friends to be much of a help to her. Abusers do this on purpose, knowing that it makes it harder for victims to leave. Due to the distance, loved ones may be unable to provide much in the way of shelter and other services. So, that's the end of the long list, and if you want more information, I've left my sources in the section below. Thanks for watching, and have a good night.